We are ready to get started. I see there's a lot of us here from all over, so we are really happy to see that. I think that will make very rich conversations as we start to engage. Awesome. And please keep those coming. Definitely want to see where you're joining us from. So welcome everyone to our webinar on sexual violence and education settings, what we know and need to know, hosted by the UN Girls Education Initiative and Sexual Violence Research Initiative. I am Alejandra Ramos Gomez, an educator from Mexico and member of Transform Education, which is a feminist coalition of youth-led networks working for gender equality, hosted by UNGEI. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear from international experts during a panel and engage in dialogue through facilitated discussion and audience engagement. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are very, very excited. Before we start, we do want to note that the subjects discussed today during our webinar might evoke some strong emotional, psychological, or physiological reactions. So we just want to make sure that we are aware of that. And to kick off our event, really, really excited to share and welcome for an opening statement from Antara Ganguly, the head of UNGEI Secretariat. So welcome, Antara.
Thank you, Alejandra. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this webinar. We at UNGEI, the UN Girls Education Initiative, we are so thrilled to continue our close partnership with SVRI, Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and we're honored and recognize our privilege in holding this space with all of you today. Thank you for joining us. Sexual violence is traumatic and has lifetime consequences on survivors. Imagine an education environment where, and here I just want to pause and recognize that some of us in this webinar may have already been through this. But imagine a school or any other education environment where a teacher constantly asks for sex in return for grades. A gender diverse child is harassed every day by their peers because of the way they speak. A parent threatens a teacher with sexual assault unless she gives higher grades to his child. Young women university students are afraid to return to their dorms after dark in fear of catcalling and unwanted touch. Or secondary school girls do not take up evening extra coaching classes because there's no safe way to get there and back. These situations occur every day and everywhere in the world. And I just want to emphasize this point. It's really the problem and the challenge is in every country. It's just a question of where we have better infrastructure to respond to it. We cannot end sexual violence until we see it for what it is, until we acknowledge it, until we report it, and until we take action to end it. The potential of schools and other education settings in preventing violence, especially sexual violence, is really under-recognized. And that is why we're here today. And just to remind us all, getting here was a journey. Last year, together with SVRI, we launched the first white paper on preventing sexual violence in education settings. We shone light on the evidence landscape, the gaps in evidence, and what we need to know more of. We also showed successful programs and policies that can actually prevent violence. And Elizabeth, my colleague, will shortly share more on that. Following this, we joined forces with more than 100 organizations on an open letter to send a powerful message to the world ministers of the first ministerial conference on violence against children in Bogota last year. Our open letter calls upon governments to take actions across levels to end sexual violence in education settings, from schools and other education settings to also community systems and to policies. We're asking for actions to take back education as a safe space for learning to grow and for developing of children's minds and bodies, which can only happen in safe, nurturing, and equal environments. We're also asking that governments partner with the experts, which means the organizations on the ground, especially those led by women and girls, teachers' unions, gender and education experts, and young feminist activists, like my sister Alejandra here today. I'm so honored and so joyful to see so many of you here today with us. It's not too late to sign the open letter. The link will be in the chat. Let's grow this movement to push for greater political will and commitment on the way to the next ministerial conference on the post 2030 agenda. We need action because sexual violence is pervasive. From all children that experience violence, and that's 1 billion, a quarter experience it in and around schools. Sexual violence is normalized. Girls around the world are forced to do the SOFA test to gain entry to a school or pass a class. Pervasive patriarchy and harmful gender norms lead to boys acting in ways that then get allowed by with claims that boys will be boys, which by the way is extremely harmful for boys as well. Perpetration of violence is harmful for boys. Online violent pornography plants seeds for aggressive sexual behavior and intimate partner violence. 1 in 4 girls aged 15 to 19 experience physical and or sexual intimate partner violence. Just think about that. That's 25%. And in some regions, that's 47%. And those regions are West and Central Africa and some parts of the Pacific. Sexual violence is a vicious cycle. The more it's prevalent in schools, the harder it will be to achieve gender equality. And the harder it will be to achieve gender equality, the more sexual violence we have. Girls' education remains a goal. It hasn't been achieved. And through violence or the fear of violence, girls are kept out of school, and gender diverse learners are also marginalized. But together we can shift this narrative. Together we can raise our voices to say, no, it's not okay. This is violence. Together we can make sure education spaces are places of equality, safety, and joy. We must affirm together that ending sexual violence is education's business. Let us continue this journey together. I'm really excited for the panel that has come together to speak now. Thank you, and back to you, Alejandra.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your powerful and actionable remarks. And I would like to echo the call to action to sign our open letter, which you can find in the chat as well. We will now hear from Elizabeth Darnall, Executive Director of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, who will ground our conversation about sexual violence in education settings. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, and thank you to Antara and UNGEI for this really, really important partnership in this conversation today. But before I start, I really want to acknowledge and thank our distinguished guests and panelists for being a part of this panel discussion, all protocols observed. Today, I'm going to provide a very quick overview of the current evidence on sexual violence in schools, what we know, and where the critical gaps remain that urgently need attention. But as Antara's just so eloquently spoken about, just a quick reminder of why we are here. Over 246 million children experience violence in and around schools every year. That's nearly half of all school-age children worldwide experiencing violence in the very places meant to protect them. And we know this is just what's been reported because fear, stigma, and broken trust keep so many more of our children from speaking out. And this isn't just about isolated incidents. It does reflect deeper systems of power and harmful gender norms that determine which children get protected and who gets harmed. The consequences are severe and long-lasting. Child victims of sexual violence at school struggle with anxiety, depression, and trauma. And many find it very hard to concentrate, disengage from learning, or leave school altogether. And I acknowledge all the many survivors that I'm sure with us today. And we know that when adults ignore, minimize, or fail to act, the harm deepens. And when we normalize this violence, we reinforce the very power imbalances and gender norms that we know drive these forms of violence. But it is against this very challenging data that there is a reason to be optimistic. We have proven frameworks like Inspire and the UNGEI and SVRI white paper and the call to action that Antara has already spoken about. And we also have evidence on how to reduce and prevent sexual violence in and around schools, and this evidence is growing. At the SVRI Forum 2024, one of the world's largest conferences on research and practice to end violence against women and violence against children, Evidence was shared on what is working to reduce different forms of violence in schools across diverse countries and settings. I'm just going to highlight 2 examples, but no, there are many, many more. In Zanzibar, for example, the Kuwaza project trained children, parents, teachers, and communities on how to recognize and respond to sexual abuse, whilst at the same time creating safer environments by clearing bushes around schools and working out safer pathways for kids to get to school. This type of comprehensive approach really did deliver some really fantastic results. Children's willingness to report sexual violence increased by nearly 100%, and recognition of abuse as harmful rose by 25%. And even very importantly, children felt really supported by caregivers. We know having support and trust in caregivers is a very powerful tool for the prevention of sexual violence in schools. In another example from Uganda, the Good School Toolkit reduced physical violence system-wide through a whole school intervention. And this just wasn't a very small pilot. It reached over 1,000 schools countrywide. And what these two small examples prove is that schools can be powerful platforms for prevention when we take a comprehensive approach. And also, it shows that this can be done at scale and the importance of schools in helping us to achieve prevention at scale. But what these 2 examples also show us is that we have an urgent need for interventions that explicitly measure and address the full range of violence children face, not just physical violence. Sexual and psychological harm also need to be measured so we can better protect children where they learn and grow. So just a little bit of a insight into what makes interventions like these work. Research shows us that the most effective interventions share several key features. First, they embed accountability throughout the system from individual classrooms to district level leadership to national level leadership rather than relying on one-off trainings. Successful programs put survivors at the center, designing programs with them, not just for them. And they ensure that we have dependable reporting and referral systems so that we know that our students trust that when they speak up, someone will act. Effective programs also confront those harmful gender norms, directly creating space for honest conversations about power and inequality. And they work because they bring in everybody, teachers, communities, students, parents, as true partners in transformation. And that's what we mean when we're talking about a whole school approach. It's not just a one-off workshop, a one-off conversation, but a way to change the entire school community and how it functions and relates to one another. So we've made progress, but we still lack great comprehensive data, particularly in under-researched regions and in those under-researched populations that Antara spoke about. We need standard tools, longitudinal studies, and very critically, children's voices need to be included to define what does good prevention look like for them. And of course, we need sustainable funding, not just short-term grants. So just to highlight, the evidence points to 3 things we know with confidence. Sexual violence in schools is widespread and it's unreported. Underreported. We must name this reality. While we can reduce physical violence, we still lack good evidence on preventing sexual violence in schools, especially at scale. And very importantly, what has already been highlighted, meaningful change needs coordinated action from all of us. And very importantly, with children and young people at the center of finding these solutions. So this is not just a rights issue. It's about a child walking into school tomorrow. We have the frameworks, we have the evidence. What we need now is ongoing political will, investment, and commitment to build, strengthen, act, and fund what we know works. The children in our schools are counting on us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your meaningful and very needed remarks and for setting the scene for this vital webinar. We will now continue our conversation by engaging in a Mentimeter survey, which was already available in the waiting room. So you will see it very soon on the screen. And please join the discussion by scanning the QR code or visiting the website. So you'll see it there. I know it's coming up. Oh, some of you, are you already there? Wonderful. So you can see, you can scan the QR code that is on the bottom right, or you can also join the website at menti.com and then use the code, which is at the top of the website as well. And we're inviting you to respond to the prompt in maximum 5 words, or I see some a bit longer. That's wonderful. And just responding, I stand against sexual violence in education settings because. And as you are responding, I will be highlighting some of your contributions. So I see some of you sharing, I stand against sexual violence in education settings because it's the right thing to do, because children in our schools deserve nothing less, because we need a violence-free society, because all children should be able to learn in safe spaces. We also see it protects education rights, because I believe in the power of education to promote equality and justice in the world and societies. Because it destroys the learner's emotional and it moved down. So, but no worries, I'll make sure to also read. And I know as you're interacting, you'll also be able to see other answers. I'll read a couple more, but I really want to point out, I think what also very powerful, right? Coming from different context, coming from different roles, and how we can all agree on the importance of standing against sexual violence in education settings. So children deserve better. It protects their rights. It destroys the learner's emotional, mental, psychological, spiritual, and physical well-being and ability to concentrate and continue with school and do life. So thinking even beyond the education setting, right? How being in school and education really will set the ground for students in all their life. Children are the future. It is the right thing to do, and all children and teachers need safe spaces. So I know we have like 1 more minute for our Mentimeter, so please feel free to keep adding, and we'll keep reading this. Is really, really important to point out. Oh yeah, and we're asking if we'll share all the points made by participants to all attendees. So definitely, I think other team members are able also to respond. But if you join the Mentimeter, you'll be able to see other contributions as well. Children deserve joyful and carefree childhoods, free from violence and trauma. Thank you so much. We see there, yes, we will download and share. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. As we mentioned in the chat, we'll continue to share. And then also, as we continue with our conversation, I do want to point out that we have the instructions for interpretation in the chat. So if you need interpretation services, the instructions are there. We want you to have the best experience here, more inclusive and accessible experience as you are participating in the webinar. So now it's time to listen to the contributions from our panel. It is truly an honor to introduce our panel participants, and I'm really, really just thankful to hear their contributions. So I would like to present. We first have Evelyn Latillo. So we don't have her right now there on the slides, but we'll make sure to drop in the chat also so you can see her name and her role. But she's here representing UN Women as the Ending Violence Against Women Prevention Lead. We also have Dr. Pia Rebelo Brito, which is UNICEF's Global Director of Education and Adolescent Development. We have Shama Boulangis, which coordinator and co-founder of Girls Congress and Transform Education. And we have Liko Bodeman, which is Deputy Director at Department of Basic Education in South Africa. So as you can see, wonderful experts from very different context, very different roles. We definitely wanted to give different perspectives on this very important topic. And just so you know how it will work, I will be asking a question to our panelists, and they will have around 5 to 6 minutes to respond to the question. And, as always, remember, we have in the chat for your contributions. So we're going to start with Evelyn from UN Women to kick off our conversation. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Evelyn. And our question is, 2025 is a landmark as the 30th anniversary of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Based on UN Women's analysis, what are countries doing to address sexual violence in education settings and the broader frame of ending violence against women and girls?
It's a good afternoon for me, good morning, good evening from everybody that's joining. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, Evelyn.
Okay, I just want to be sure my sound is working. And it's a real pleasure for us to be here. I will shortly go to talk about what our preliminary analysis of Beijing reports 30 years down the road is looking like. But I just wanted to sort of maybe start us from the context, particularly that I was going to say Rachel. I think when I think about SVRI, I still think about, but Liz had laid a little bit around what is data telling us that's working in terms of ending violence against women broadly, but also including sexual-related violence in education settings. I would like to refer us to a guidance tool that we developed in partnership with UNESCO to sort of like try to frame and show some critical entry points for working to address sexual-related violence in school. And it indicated a number of things, some of which, previous speakers have alluded to. School ensuring safe environments for learners, ensuring we have curriculums that embed prevention, but also issues around sexual violence, including response, so that everybody is informed, but also reporting mechanisms are clear. Issues around accountability that we've talked about, as well as stakeholder engagement, multi-stakeholder engagement at different levels, so that we are able to work across the ecological model, as well as, and which I'm going to focus on a little bit, is leadership, especially around laws, policies, and education reforms. So Beijing at 30, and if you look at the 12 critical areas, of course, we have, violence against women, but also girl child education as some of the priority areas. And so we have done a deep dive and have collected data from over 193 countries to be able to report on how they are faring on the 12 critical areas, and where progress has been made, where progress has not been made, and what we need to be able to do very differently. So our focus is going to be two linkages, I think, that are critical: laws and policies, but also recognizing that the findings are indicating that while addressing laws and policies and in terms of implementation, in terms of review, in terms of alignment with global standards is important, what is even much more important is being able to translate this into national action plans that are whole of government, multi-sectoral, and that bringing together different stakeholders. So how we can look at addressing school-related violence, not just from the lens of one sector, but to be able to say that we have in place health actors, we have security actors, we have government institutions, we have ministries that bring funding to the table, development partners, so that we sort of have an ecosystem that is able to not only create an environment that says no to violence across the board, but specifically brings in concerted effort to be able to address violence against women. So to the data, and I don't have a lot of time, I will speak to the extent possible, and we are happy to share documents that you can refer to even after the conversation here. So what did we do at Beijing, and what are the preliminary findings showing us? So for this conversation, I pulled a couple of entries that might be interesting. And from the global database that we're talking about, we have about 7,500 entries from 193 member states that are reporting on interventions that they are taking to address violence against women. I just want to post one chart, and I didn't do a presentation, so I didn't feel like, I don't know what's gonna happen here. It's not posting, maybe I don't have posting rights, but from this analysis, what did we see? That 90% of member states have measures or they have laws that address policies, services, prevention, and research for violence against women broadly. And so, do we have laws that are adequate? Do they exist? 90% of member states say, yes, we do have laws that address violence against women and girls, including sexual violence. So when we juxtaposed this across different parameters, so for example, we looked at laws on domestic violence, laws on trafficking, laws on sexual violence. Broadly, we realized that on average, of the 193 countries, 73% had laws on domestic violence, 71 had laws on sexual violence, and 77 had laws on trafficking. So good, an excellent performance in terms of laws. But then when we went to unpack that further, we see that 37% of these countries have policies on domestic violence, 21% have policies on sexual violence. So great laws, but in terms of now translation into costed plans that can be implemented at the different sectoral level and in different institutions, then we start to see the gap. And I think that's the big question we've always had. How are we translating laws into action? How are we moving them away from the papers that they are on to be able to change the real lives of people? And then we have 84% policies on trafficking. So you're seeing 21%, so great laws on sexual violence policies low. When we look at prevention, we see 52% of countries have investments on prevention of domestic violence, but 26% have investments on prevention on sexual violence, and then 26% on trafficking. So again, great laws, no action plans, but also no prevention or low prevention investment to address sexual violence, broadly, including in education settings. Then when we look at services, you see that 70% of countries have services for domestic violence, 38% have services for sexual violence, and about 48% have services for trafficking. Just quickly, data across 3 parameters. So what are we seeing? And why are we still in this conundrum? Why we keep saying more efforts, more investment, more awareness is needed on sexual violence, more especially among girls and in school settings, to say that we see a lot of mismatch, in terms of investment with other areas. And of course, we broadly know that overall violence against women doesn't have large investment. And so if we have sexual violence and violence in education setting coming that low, that means we have much more work that we need to be able to do. Now, I wanted to be able to speak on what we are seeing, and perhaps what will be important is to say that where, and the good news perhaps is that where laws exist, we also see that the investment in holistic government whole of approaches are higher. So the existence of laws is almost like a catalyst for investment in other interventions as well. And I will share the presentation. So where we have laws and policies that are implemented, then we see institutional mechanisms, including justice sectors, are more effective. We see that prevention, including awareness campaigns, are more effective. And very quickly, from the 193 member states, we are able to tell that where laws exist, at least there is about 90% investment in prevention, that there is some investment in services. And so there's certainly a connection between existence of laws and I guess the advocacy to implement the laws, to put in place infrastructure to be able to position to that. So we do have great examples out there. And I think we can sort of really go ahead to see, countries like Iceland, where comprehensive approach by state to address sexual violence comprehensively cascades. And we see it in specialized departments in police. We see specialized units for victims, including of sexual violence. We see dedicated national action plans. So when we look at stakeholder engagement very broadly, address sexual violence within a continuum of violence and within an ecosystem, then we are able to see much higher results than when we see it in isolation. And that's what we are beginning to see in Beijing. So what does that tell us for our advocacy? That we need to be able to move beyond the education institutions that traditionally work with, focusing, we need to not just focus on the child-focused organizations that we work with, civil society that we work with, but look at including private sector that can collectively bring their voice to be able to move the pin on ending sexual violence in schools. We have great examples as well in countries like Spain that are seeing the ripple effect of holistic, system-wide, comprehensive investments to move the button. So how are we going to change things 5 years to the end of the SDGs? If 30 years from Beijing is looking like, what catalytic interventions do we need to be able to do? What innovations are required? And I hope that this data, and we're happy to share more, will be able to help us in our advocacy, in our programming, in our research moving forward. So I just want to end by saying that we have adequate laws on violence against women and sexual violence broadly, including in education settings. But we continue to see this as a problem because while laws are essential, while the normative framework and global standards that frame and call us to attention now are recognized, we are yet to see actual investment in some of the critical areas, prevention, funding, as well as plans, including at the lowest level. Because if you look at the structure of most of our governance system, not just centralized plans, but plans at the district level, plans at the regional level, so that people are able to track resources, they are able to provide accountability, and they are able to report on the efforts that we have. So preliminary, that's what Beijing is looking like. We will share the detailed report once we are ready with it, but I want to end there and leave it to room for questions and clarifications from the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for such an insightful response and really, I think, highlighting the importance, right, of translating data, laws, and policies to actionable plans. Thank you so much. We will now continue with Dr. Pia Rebelo Brito. So I do have a question ready. And my question is, Dr. Pia, what has proven to work to prevent sexual violence in education settings?
Thank you. Thanks so much for the question, and wonderful to be here. Excellencies, colleagues, partners, friends, all protocols observed, and what a great, great participation and wonderful panelists. It's really, really an honor to be here today and speak about this issue that's it's so interesting. It's a paradox. It's urgent and invisible at the same time, the issue on sexual violence in and around schools. So really happy to be here to talk about this. I want to start with one basic truth, which is 1 in 8 girls and 1 in 11 boys. And I say this not just as statistics. 1 in 8 girls, 1 in 11 boys, children, real children, have experienced rape or sexual assault before the age 18. While that sinks in, I'm going to talk about some data. While not recent, it still gives us a trend. This was a 2020 survey conducted across 10 countries with almost 400,000 adolescent girls who reported sexual abuse in school in the last 12 months. So, schools means those safe spaces that are meant to nurture learning and dreams. All too often for these girls became places of silence, fear, and trauma. And I want to thank Antara in her opening remarks. She shared with us stories that made these numbers so real with a human face. And as we look at that, we know this is not just about individuals, it's about education, it's about the system, it's what's driving school dropouts, it's what's connected to teenage pregnancy, stigma, lost futures, and it's feeding into the global learning crisis that we're talking about. So, this interlinkage between gender inequality and systematically denying women and girls the same rights as boys and men is also part of a future we want that is being really impacted. But I want to shine a light on another truth today, another truth that gives us hope. What we are seeing is that sexual violence in schools is preventable. Now, we heard what works, and I want to build on the wonderful examples that Liz shared with us in her opening remarks. Thanks for those, Liz. Across the world, we're seeing an impact at scale. So, what works is not just isolated good practices anymore, it's sustainable solutions led by governments and communities, supported by evidence and backed by political will. I'm going to give you a few. Sierra Leone, for example. The national partnership between the Ministry of Education, UNICEF, and UNGEI reached over 145,000 adolescent girls and boys across 200 schools, and the results were striking. Listen to this. The reported number of sexual violence incidents dropped from 85% to 52%. And students who believed that rape should be kept secret fell from 31% to single digits, just 9%. This is success. This is success that built on a multi-sectoral approach, teacher training, safe reporting pathways, support to survivors, and efforts to shift harmful norms. And thanks to the support from the Global Partnership for Education, Safe to Learn Coalition, this partnership is scaling. So amazing work, Sierra Leone and the entire team. Great to share it today. I want to talk about another successful example from Niger, where we've supported the creation of village child protection community committees. Now, in just 1 year, this committee was referred over 660 cases of violence, including sexual abuse and early marriage. Through community dialogue, families challenging long-term held gender norms, supporting girls' education, and enabling women to play a greater role in household decision-making. This is making an invisible issue visible for attention and action. Well done, Niger. And in Togo, the Ministry of Education, with UNICEF support, is embedding gender-based violence prevention into every level of the education system. Harmonized teacher training and curriculum reform, student-led platforms that challenge silence and stigma, and over 18,000 students have already been reached. These are foundations for safer, more inclusive, and more accountable schools. So thank you, Togo, for being the lighthouse. And colleagues on the call today, I can go on and on and on. But just with these three examples, we are learning something. We are seeing some common threads, and let's unpack them. I'm sharing with you three core threads that I have seen. First, strengthening social protection, child protection systems. Second, shifting harmful social norms. And third, ensuring survivors receive care and support they need. And critically, these three levers must be embedded in national systems grounded in community leadership. So you see the model is emerging. The model where it shows us that change is possible at scale and sustainable. This is why UNICEF, with support from Global Affairs Canada, is partnering with governments in Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger, Togo. I can go on to embed violence prevention into education sector plans and taking the Safe to Learn agenda to scale. So I would say we are at a turning point now. We sort of have these models, we know how they work, we know the situation, and at this turning point, we had the first ever ministerial conference on violence against children in Bogota. Now, over 45 governments made specific pledges to ensure safe and learning environments. That is a milestone for political will and multilateral cooperation. But pledges must become practice. What we need now is sustained investment, bold implementation, and shared accountability to every child everywhere. Let me unpack that. UNICEF is stepping up. For the next 5 years, we have committed to reach at least 142 million children with proven solutions. We're investing in national data systems across 50 countries, driving transformation, gender responsive action that really address the root causes of violence in education systems. So I want to close with an urgent, optimistic, but a message of commitment. Okay, we have the evidence, we talked about that. We have the tools, we heard about that. We have growing policy strategies, just shared by my colleague Evelyn from UN Women. And what we saw through your answers that you provided in the Mentimeter, we have collective courage to act, invest, and insist that no child should ever have to trade the safety of a seat in a classroom. No trade on that. So let's see how this is the call to action I want to put to all of us today. How can we hold all of us to the highest standard of accountability to bring these commitments of evidence, tools, political commitment, collective coverage, policies? How do we bring these together to have that action that will ensure every school is a safe place to learn, grow, and to thrive? And here I want to talk especially about girls and the most marginalized, because let's be clear, we cannot and will not be deterred. No threat, no barrier, no form of violence should ever stand in the way of a girl's right to education. And because of that, we all need to hold the line. We have to hold the line, which is so critical, because we know ending sexual violence in education isn't just possible, it's essential for justice, equality, and the future we all believe in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pia, for your powerful contribution, and also wanted to highlight that importance of sustainable solutions through multi-sectoral approaches and partnerships. Really important. So now I am really happy to continue with a fellow Transform Education member, Washama Bulanjis. So I have a question ready. From your perspective, what are the connections between sexual violence and education settings on the impact of learning, gender equality in children's lives and on society?
Thank you so much, Alejandra. And hi, everybody. My name is Shama, and I speak as a young feminist activist from the Philippines. Shout out to my kababayans who are in the chat right now. And I'm also the co-founder of Girls Congress, a young feminist-led organization based in Dumaguete City, and also a member of Transform Education, a young feminist network working to achieve gender equality in and through education. And we're hosted by the UN Girls Education Initiative. Today, I want to speak to you not only from research and advocacy, but also from the collective strength, grief, resistance, and imagination of girls and young people who have survived harm and are building alternatives. First, let's be clear, and I know that I'm speaking to the choir here. Sexual violence in education settings is not only a violation of rights, it is a rupture of trust in institutions that are meant to nurture us. Sexual violence does not only happen in isolated incidents, it exists in cultures of silence, protection of perpetrators, and institutional complicity. In classrooms, on campuses, and even in digital learning spaces, survivors face re-traumatization, harassment, disbelief, or punishment for speaking out. Second, this is not just an education issue, It's a gender justice issue. Sexual violence reinforces hierarchies of gender, age, and power. It tells girls, queer youth, and gender diverse learners, your body is not yours, your safety is conditional, your voice is inconvenient. And it tells boys that power means dominance, silence is strength, simplicity is normal. And the impact on learning, devastating. We've heard stories of girls dropping out, being forced to relocate, changing schools, or being silenced in fear. But it's not just about dropping out. It's about being pushed out, about learning, becoming unsafe, triggering, or impossible, about futures interrupted. But we also hear of girls coming together, standing in solidarity with each other. When I was in university, I was alone, I was on scholarship, I was a working student. This means that I couldn't afford going on required school trips and explained this to my teacher. He said he would help. When we arrived at the camp, I went to the room that was assigned to me, and it turns out it was his room as well, and we were to share a bed together. And he said it with a tone, and you know what I mean with that tone. I left and didn't attend class for 3 months, which caused me to fail the class. I had to repeat the course, lose my full scholarship, but at least I had a different teacher. And I beat myself up for choosing flight instead of flight every single day since then. My first engagement with vow work was in high school. My friend came to me and told me about her uncle is inappropriately touching her, and this is when we went together and created a small group to support her. We tried to engage with lawyers, but eventually she chose not to pursue the case. My knowledge as a peer educator on vow helped work in supporting her through her journey. The lesson to be learned here is two-pronged. A lot of times, a lot of survivors go through life unaided, and sometimes activists, like I already was in university, I was very well versed in RA 9262 in the Philippines. However, in the lack of proper support, we can still fall in the crevices of people that we have failed to support and really make sure that to protect. The second lesson here is the power of community and how young people and the community that we build can be a powerful support system, not just for redress, but for healing. In our implementation of leadership sessions with Girls Congress, we have found out that a lot of high school girls in Dumaguete in the first cohort have experienced being hit on by teachers, catcalled to and on their way to from school, harassed by their peers. And every day they have to face these people because for us who are able to act schools, we spend most of our childhood there. We conducted a participatory action research of 261 15 to 17-year-old girls and found out that 75% of them, 3 in 4 girls that we have surveyed, have experienced violence at least once. And 35 of them have reported being asked for sexual favors in exchange for good grades. And only 29% of them, less than 50%, even less than 30%, felt like they could report to authorities. And all of those people who said that they felt like they could report to authorities were people who have experienced violence in their lifetime. This is where young feminist leadership is essential. In my organization and in so many other young feminist-led spaces, we are not just demanding change. We are co-creating it. We are working with survivors to design policies, run listening circles, we audit safety school measures, and we rewrite codes of conduct. We are building frameworks of accountability rooted in care. And we especially are insisting on intersectionality because we know that the risks and responses to violence are shaped by our identities. Whether we are Indigenous, living with disabilities, LGBTQ+, or from rural, hard-to-reach areas. We center those most excluded and build from their knowledge. Let me also be clear, this work is not easy at all. It is resource intensive, it is emotionally heavy, especially for survivors who have chosen to make this their life's work, and it is often unpaid. But despite being informal, it is also transformative. Young feminist organizers are building systems of mutual care and protection that schools and governments have failed to provide for us. We should not be doing this alone, and we should not be treated as afterthoughts or youth engagement checkboxes. Partnerships must go beyond consultation. They must mean co-governance. This is why we always call on governments, education ministries, and agencies, donors to support and resource survivor-led and youth-led initiatives, not just for their pilot projects, but as permanent partners, to involve us in decision-making spaces, to shift power and resources to those who are most impacted and most invested in change. Let me leave you with 3 concrete points. The first one, to end impunity and invest in survivor-centered systems of accountability with a whole school approach. And this means to protecting survivors, providing access to legal and psychosocial support, and holding both individuals and institutions accountable for harm. We need to train and sensitize everyone in the school system, not just the teachers. This includes your security guards, your canteen vendors, the janitors. It is everyone's business to address sexual violence in schools. Number 2, integrate gender transformative and comprehensive sexuality education that includes consent, power, gender norms, and pleasure into all schools, not as an add-on, but as foundational to any learning environment that claims to be safe or empowering. Number 3, recognize and fund young feminist leadership as essential infrastructure in ending school-related gender-based violence. We are not just participants, we are visionaries, we are architects, and we are defenders of a more just future. We have an opportunity here to rebuild education as a place of healing, dignity, and justice. And for that, we need all of us, especially those who have been silenced for too long. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shama, for your strength and vulnerability and sharing your personal experiences. We deeply appreciate your contribution, and I see a lot of love. I see a lot of reactions in the chat. I think a lot of people agree. So thank you so much. We will end our panel section of the event by listening to our last panelist, Liko Bodeman. So we do have a question ready. And the question is, let me see that we have our last panelist ready to go, perhaps highlighted, spotlight. And the question is, what needs to be done to end sexual violence in education settings? And how can we draw upon commitments made at the Ministerial Conference on Ending Violence Against Children?
Thank you so much. It is an afternoon in South Africa, and thanks for inviting us. We enjoy a very good relationship with the United Nations Girls Education Initiative, as well as the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. There are a couple of things that we know for sure need to happen. The first thing is that we need, as a basic education sector, we need to strengthen our curriculum so that it speaks about issues of sexual violence and sexual abuse, body autonomy, gender equality from an earlier age than we currently are doing. Because many of the curriculum evaluation and assessment exercises that have happened with our curricula, particularly in the African continent, have indicated to us that we start too late with this content with children. But we also need to be mindful of some of the research that is also coming out in this space. And that research is saying that providing this content to children does not necessarily imply that you would have protected children from sexual violation, because children do not sexually violate themselves or each other, but they get violated by adults. So well and good, they will have the content, they will have the vocabulary to explain what has happened to them, but it doesn't stop what has happened to them. And so in other words, doing curriculum that is directed at children has very little impact on the prevention of sexual violence against children. And so that we now know. And so the question is, so who should the messaging be directed at, if not children, when it is in the curriculum? So they say, yes, you may continue because we do need children who have got sexual violence prevention literacy, so that even when they have to appear in court, that they've got that literacy, that they're able to then describe, because we've seen many cases that find themselves or that land themselves in the courts of law, allowing perpetrators to walk away scot-free purely because our children did not have the vocabulary and the literacy for violence prevention. And so they say, continue with that. But I think that should be coupled with the work that you do outside of what is your core mandate as basic education or the education sector. So talking to and appealing to the conscience of stakeholders and community stakeholders and our parents and caregivers and adults at large, because we need them to be protective of children rather than violating children. So that's the work that we need to do with curriculum and the curriculum strengthening. The second thing that we need to do, we need to ensure that our teachers are sufficiently trained to deliver this content, number one, but number two, to be able to manage the reporting and management of sexual abuse and harassment in their schools. Because again, particularly in South Africa, we are now dealing with a situation where cases of sexual violence have been mismanaged at an institution level, not because there has been foul play, but because no adequate training has happened with those teachers so that they understand the protocols and the procedures for the management and reporting of sexual abuse and harassment in schools. And so there's a great deal of work that we need to do to train our teachers, not only on curriculum delivery, but also on the governance and management aspects of prevention of sexual violence in schools, and therefore also management thereof. And so when we do this work, it's going to be very important that now that there has been incorporation of ECD in education and basic education in a number of SADC countries for that matter, it therefore means that early childhood interventions for teacher training need to come to play. We can't start later because we're now learning that it's not just harmful gender norms that children pick up later in life, but it is actually harmful gender norms that children pick up in early childhood education stages. But because there is a lot of discomfort about delivering such content with children, the suggestion is that let us then engage with ECD practitioners and foundation phase educators so that we are able to give them what we call gender responsive pedagogies for early childhood education, so that from an early age, children are taught to understand gender equality in a way that does not over-sexualize them, as we have been crucified in the recent years in South Africa, that we're not over-sexualizing children, but you are teaching these people who impart knowledge to children to be gender responsive, to be gender sensitive. And then I think that perhaps what we need to do is to also then agree that the education management and governance work that we're going to do with school governing bodies in our schools will probably also need to transcend to what we call independent schools or private schools or schools in the private education system. Because often the protocols that you put out and the policy frameworks in education that you put out do not get implemented by private schools or independent schools or schools in the private education system, because they don't view themselves as schools that should be governed by the same laws, by the same policy frameworks, and the same pieces of legislation in the country. And so we need to draw very closely with independent school sector and the private schooling sector, so that what we do in public ordinary schools, we also do that in independent schools and private schools. Lastly, from my side, I think that as we talk about all of this, we must not forget schools of learners with special education needs or schools of learners with disabilities, because often the material that we develop, the advocacy material that we develop, is written in English most of the time and not in the vernacular languages. And it is not translated in Braille. It is not translated in audio. And therefore, it means that you will forever just be talking to the able-bodied population in education settings. But we all know that with learners with disabilities, the vulnerability becomes compounded by those disabilities. And so it means that we need to think and think deliberately about how we become inclusive of learners in special education needs education settings, so that we're able to cater for those as well, so that we're able to then address this issue. There are a number of issues that we could count, but these are just some of the ideas that come to our mind very quickly, which are doable. I like the speaker that was saying that the good picture here is that we know that sexual violence is preventable in schools, and these are just some of the touch points and change levers that you could engage to do this work. And what works for us now, and we need to ride on this wave, is that we've got many men who have come forward and who have put up their hand to help and work with us in solidarity to address this issue. And we must ride on that wave. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonneman. And I see a lot of contributions in the chat as well. Thank you for this powerful reminder of educating all stakeholders, right? And the importance of capacity building for educators and facilitators across sectors. So now it is time to continue to our facilitated discussion portion of the event. For this, we would like to invite you to share your thoughts and reflections by raising your hand, and then I will then call your name to unmute yourself. We also invite you to share reflections and thoughts in the chat, as you've been doing during the webinar. So I think I'll start seeing perhaps some hands. And I hear the hand. Let me make sure. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll start with Sally Gear. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you see me all right?
Unfortunately, we can't see you, Sally, but we can hear you.
I think I might have got the wrong. Do I have to join as a panelist to be able to be seen?
Oh, well, we can hear you really well. If you don't mind, perhaps with the voice, we will try to do some troubleshoot on the back.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
And I've got it now. I can do my own video.
Wonderful.
Apologies. Yeah. Okay. All good. Great. Thanks ever so much to UNGEI and to the fantastic panelists. This was really great opportunity to just hear a real diverse set of interventions and the evidence, and be joined by people around the world. So I'm Sally Gear. I work at the GPE, the Global Partnership for Education Secretariat, lead on their work on gender and inclusion, but obviously everyone, so many people here are a part of the broader partnership. I've only just got a couple of points, Alenga, if that's okay. I think one of the things just to share to you all is that, as you know, GP works across about 90 partner countries, and very interestingly, about over 50% of them over the last couple of years, through the entry point, I would say, probably of gender equality, have really recognised that gender-based violence and broader and violence in general is a real barrier in terms of priority reforms, whether that were, you know, particularly on learning outcomes. And many of our countries are really concerned about, as we know, worrying that children are going to school and coming out of it not learning, but recognizing that violence is a key barrier to that. And I guess I just wanted to sort of be quite explicit as well about, we all know there's a global funding crisis going on at the moment. But at the same time, this is grist to the mill to make the case both for domestic finance from governments, but also for the global aid environment, that actually we need to ensure efficiency and equity is central to that debate. And I do think that this issue on violence is so critical. We've got the evidence now. We know that an education system is not efficient if children aren't learning and if they're dropping out because of these issues of concern. We know that equity of spending is not delivering if there are many, many children, particularly as, and many have spoken very powerfully about the vulnerability between particularly our colleague from South Africa talking about children with a disability, children living in very remote communities who don't get that sort of protection. So I think there's a broader sort of funding context that I think we need to sort of insert into this, and this is the moment really to make the case. We know it's a rights issue, of course it is, but it's also very much around how we can ensure that we come together as an education community to really look at the evidence on what's stopping children learning. And then just finally, and this is a little bit self-indulgent because this is my technical hat on, it's to do with systems. And I just sort of feel that there's so many issues around this, but maybe if we think about it in layers, so, and with a systems lens, and I'm talking about all countries here, not just countries that are in the south, because it certainly doesn't work here in the UK, but what does good look like in this space? Number one, it looks like it's a system that responds to the child who has been abused, a girl or a boy. So they know who to talk to, they have a voice, and they're protected. We need to ensure there's a system that works there. It works in the UK in some place, some schools, it doesn't work in others, but that's what good looks like. I think the second point is that we have schools that head teachers know what to do. Teachers know what to do. They have good relationships with local authorities. They know how to report. That's what good looks like at school level. At subnational level with local authorities, again, so in making sure we're equitable, we have local governmental structures. And often we find with our work with partner countries, there's some brilliant policies at national level on gender, national level on violence prevention, but when we go to local government level, that's sometimes more challenging to repeat. And then obviously loads of people have talked about the importance of legislation, accountability, and ensuring that, you know, that there is a broader legalistic policy framework from the government and really strong leadership. So just sort of thinking about those different layers and where we can all work together as a community, wherever we sit in the system. Some of us have more influence in terms of different layers. I certainly don't have that local level experience that we've heard so powerfully from some of the panelists, but thanks very much for the opportunity, and sorry if I've spoken a bit long, but thank you for the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sally, and those reminders also of working across system levels, right? And thinking about our context and where we are and what we can do. So now we're going to continue with Olenike Timipa. So I wrote it there. And I apologize if you know if I mispronounce your name. Please go ahead. As we see your hand. Let's go ahead. You can unmute yourself. There you go. We saw for a second you were unmuted. If you want to try again, there you see. Wonderful.
Hi, thank you so much. This is such an important conversation happening. My name is Olanike Timipa, and I work with Teenage Network in Nigeria. Just last month, Teenage Network supported the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria Education Secretariat to launch a sexual violence reporting and management framework that covers, more than 2,000 schools, both government-owned and private schools. The need for this framework was not as a result of absence of policies in Nigeria that speaks to sexual violence being an illegal occurrence, but rather the need to answer questions that learners have had over the years, questions about the need for a clear reporting pathways for cases of sexual violence, questions around what is the minimum standard of response that school should give, to survivors of sexual violence within the school system, or what kind of care should survivors of sexual violence expect, from education authority. And so managing cases of sexual violence within the school is not only instilling hope in learners, but also promoting a culture of safety in the society at large. And so based on the learning for us at Teenage Network, eradicating sexual violence within the school system would meet three important criteria. The first one being building the capacity of education stakeholders, schools, to understand early warning signs of sexual violence and to respond adequately to issues relating to sexual violence. Secondly, is the need for policies or framework to clearly state the role and responsibilities of stakeholders in identifying early warning signs of sexual violence and in responding to this. While thirdly, the need to clearly, to support young feminist organizations that are working to promote school safety, even at the grassroots level, to an extent to which they are able to hold governments accountable, able to hold school administrators accountable. There's a need for us to build the skills of our learners, not only to address early warning signs of sexual violence, but to also have the right culture, within this, have the right culture. So, for example, studies have shown that perpetrators of school-related sexual violence are majorly male students. This is a major issue on our end. It speaks, danger of what to expect within our society. And so it's very important that we pay attention to eradicating school-related sexual violence while clearly stating the roles and responsibility of stakeholders to ensure accountability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lanika. Thanks so much for your contribution. And I know we have someone next who messaged. I know there was a little problem with raising the hand, but I know I have her next. So, Jihan Daltrus, we have you next.
Yes,
You can go
thank you
ahead.
very
There
much,
you go.
Alejandra. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Super. So thank you very much to you, to SVRI, UNGEI, for this very, very exciting and interesting webinar to talk about such an important issue. I'm Jihan Latrus. I work for Education Cannot Wait, the Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on the specificity of humanitarian settings. And I would like to share a couple of thoughts. The first one is that we see that during conflict and humanitarian crisis, risks of sexual violence in education and emergencies are exacerbated. Girls and women are disproportionately affected by the impact of emergencies on education because of many pre-existing reasons. Gender norms, families may prioritize boys' education, choosing not to pay for girls' school fees, etc. And as a result, an economic impact of conflict, crisis, and forced displacement, this can heighten the risk of sexual exploitation when girls, particularly adolescent girls, are pressured to exchange sex for school fees. And at the same time, emergencies can create risks for children, particularly girls, due to distance to access learning spaces and the risks they can encounter on the road, or lack of safe and gender segregated wash facilities. So that's the first part. But the second part is also that conflict is widely recognized as one of the biggest disruptors of children's access to education globally, and that children affected by conflict-related sexual violence remain an underserved group. It is incredibly difficult for children affected by conflict-related sexual violence to simply return to school and pick up where they left off. And a supportive school environment which offers trauma-responsive education and engages and supports caregivers and communities is key in repairing what was damaged. So I just want to highlight here that the education in the emergency sector plays a key role to reduce the incidence of gender-based violence and sexual violence by systematically integrating concrete GBV risk mitigation measures into its programming. And the HEI sector also needs to prioritize trauma-informed, flexible learning environments that facilitate reintegration into society of children affected by conflict-related sexual violence and other grave crimes. And as the Global Fund for Education in Emergencies, ECW joined in 2021 the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies and made a commitment that ECW will include GBV risk mitigation across all its investments. As a result, in 2024, 77% of approved investments by ECW allocated part of their budget to GBV risk mitigation. And such measures, including safety audits, implementation of GBV risk mitigation measures, training of teachers and education personnel on GBV core concepts, safe referrals, dissemination of GBV referral pathways in partnership and coordination with GBV awards, etc. And earlier this year, we started a partnership with the Global Survivors Fund to provide support in northeastern Nigeria to out-of-school child survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and their children born out of rape through holistic learning and trauma-informed programs tailored to their psychosocial needs. And this service delivery was provided by a Nigerian local women organization advocating for and improving access to quality education for conflict-affected and marginalized groups, particularly girls. And this important initiative highlights the importance of education as part of the continuum of care for survivors of GBV. So, of course, education has a key role in prevention of sexual violence, but it also has a critical role as part of the continuum of care and the response, once violations have happened. So what I would like to end with, sorry, I know we don't have much time, is to say that in the current context of funding cuts and humanitarian reset, it is really critical to come together and advocate for the life-saving and life-changing nature of EIE, and to advocate for the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration, particularly the preservation of the GBV AOR, which is at risk of being folded under a broader protection cluster, diluting GBV focus and leadership. And lastly, to advocate for the meaningful participation and leadership of local women organizations in the design and implementation of EIE responses, as they play a key role in accessing and supporting the most marginalized groups, including girl survivors of sexual violence. This is particularly urgent as a recent report from UN Women indicates that due to the recent funding cuts, almost half of women-led organizations surveyed expect to shut down within 6 months if current funding levels persist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jihan, for sharing with us and for that call to action as well. So now we've come to the end of this webinar. We want to thank you again, everyone, for your participation, for your commitment and valuable contributions, whether it was through your voice or through the chat. We are deeply inspired by everyone and everything that was shared. And for, just to end, we want to say, let's continue to work together to end sexual violence in education settings. Thank you so much for joining us.